Welcome to Millennium Zeitgeist, a new podcast which will be surfing the zeitgeist of deep politics, conspiracies, but also other subjects, healthcare, and more lighthearted stuff, movies, pop culture. So, a wide range of subjects. My name is Yusuf El Gengi. I'm based here in the UK, in England. My background is in medicine. I'm a doctor, but I'm also a freelance journalist and a writer. I've written one book on healthcare, on the healthcare system here, called How to Dismantle the NHS in 10 Easy Steps, which charted the story of how the NHS, how our public healthcare system has been basically dismantled, marketized, and semi privatized. But since then, I've been writing on movies, on pop culture, and also very much on politics for the Independent newspaper, The Guardian, other outlets. And I've been blogging for Substack and Medium. And so I decided to set this up as a podcast. And we'll be starting today with something quite lighthearted, which is the recent Netflix movie, which came out just before Christmas. George Clooney, Noah Baumbach collaboration, Jay Kelly. So I blogged about this on Substack last month. So we will be trying to cover that today. Now, I think what's interesting is that we might want to actually start with Quentin Tarantino, who recently has been upsetting apple carts all over Tinseltown. He disparaged, I think that was December as well, disparaged Paul Dano. That was all over the news. He had been making, I think, compiling, as Tarantino tends to do, going back to his kind of his video store, I should say, days. He was making, I think, a list of the greatest movies of the 21st century, and he was basically moaning that Paul Dano is the weakest, as he described him, the weakest effing actor in SAG, the Screen Actors Guild, and weak sauce, which is an interesting description. He blamed him for the reason that the masterpiece, Paul Thomas Anderson's There Will Be Blood with Daniel Day-Lewis wasn't higher up his personal list of greatest movies. I guess, of course, when you're something of a kind of an auteur or doyen like Tarantino, that you're entitled to make these lists, but it is a bizarre list. He includes Shaun of the Dead, Jackass, School of Rock in his list of greatest movies of the 21st century for some reason. Anyway, Tarantino's argument, I think, is basically that Dano just isn't really a foil to Daniel Day Lewis's lead role, which is pretty harsh criticism. I think not many people can keep up with Day Lewis. Probably wondering now why the hell I'm talking about Tarantino. It's not his movie. The reason is that Tarantino's also was having a dig at George Clooney. He said he was asked about Clooney in kind of I think he was talking about movie stars, and he basically dismissed him as a movie star. He's not a legit movie star. He hasn't had a hit since the turn of the millennium. This pissed off Clooney, who basically told him to F off because Tarantino had essentially written off most of his career, including Coen Brothers collaborations, Gravity, the Oceans series, even, worthy movies such as Good Night and Good Luck, which was a good film, a role he's recently reprised on Broadway, interestingly, and that was his kind of debut, I think, Broadway role, which reminds us that Clooney, maybe Tarantino has a point. Clooney isn't exactly the actor's actor. He made his name, after all, as hunky Dr. Ross in ER. Anyway, Clooney came to the defense of Dano end of last year. Tarantino clearly has reached kind of a point of success in his career where he's no longer kind of doing diplomacy. Maybe he's just on the spectrum. Maybe he's just a bit of an a-hole. Anyway, back to the movie in question, Jay Kelly, directed by Noah Baumbach, starring George Clooney and Adam Sandler. So Clooney basically plays himself. He plays a bona fide A-list movie star, the protagonist, the eponymous protagonist, Jay Kelly. Kelly is kind of a star at the tail end of his career. Sound familiar? Could this be Clooney's swan song? Anyway, in the movie, Jay Kelly is traveling to Tuscany in Italy for a tribute to his career, organized by his agent, played by Adam Sandler. And this structure kind of provides the hook for the movie. And along the way, Jay Kelly ponders his life and times. He reflects nostalgically on his career. And it gradually becomes apparent he's been so embroiled in his celebrity bubble that he's kind of let everyone close to him, from family to friends to kind of colleagues, down. He ends up bumping into an old buddy, played beautifully by. Sorry, I'm just going to have to double check this. Played by Billy Crudup, he of Almost Famous fame. So he bumped into this old acting buddy from his youth. After a funeral, they agreed to go for a spontaneous drink, something that he doesn't do as an A-list celebrity. And his buddy has basically been left behind in the kind of the middle class ghetto, if you like. And it basically transpires over the drinks as they reflect on their lives that his buddy, Billy Crudup, basically was the more serious actor. He could do method. He was more committed to his craft. And he was basically the better actor than the lightweight Jay Kelly ever was. Then we then find out that essentially at big auditions his nerves would get the better of him, something that Jay Kelly didn't have a problem with, and that they basically sadly end up having a fight. They end up in fisticuffs in a car park, um, and we soon discover why that is. But essentially, the movie's kind of self-reflexive. It's a movie about movies and and filmmaking, and it's essentially trying to make a point here that what does it really take to be a star? Is movie stardom just hocus pocus? Is it a confidence trick? Is it the ability to persuade or convince others of some undefinable quality? Is it a contract between us, the audience, and stars, in which, often largely down to promotion and marketing by big studios, big agencies, or streaming services, that we kind of confer this status of movie star upon certain actors? Or do some stars genuinely have this kind of radioactive charisma when the cameras turn on and it's committed to celluloid for all of eternity? Think of perhaps Leonardo DiCaprio as Jack Dawson in the first half of Titanic. James Cameron, the director, described DiCaprio as unlimited. Think of that opening card game scene where he wins the tickets to board Titanic, and that first line stolen from, of course, Bob Dylan's "Like a Rolling Stone." When you've got nothing to lose. Dylan himself, of course, as we know from his memoir and biographies, he's been engaged his whole career through his songwriting in a kind of hypnotic act of self mythologizing, which was depicted very much in the recent Chalamet movie, a Timothy Chalamet movie, A Complete Unknown. Um, anyway, as we said, this kind of reunion between Jay Kelly and his buddy ends in a fight. Black eye for Kelly. Well, you should have seen the other guy. In fact, we never do see the other guy again. The movie discards him. Like most of us, most people, his dreams have been crushed uh, under the kind of material weight of pragmatism. And um, his buddy's obviously been harboring resentment towards Jay Kelly for the past few days. It turns out that he had a big audition, and Jay Kelly kind of back then, 35 years earlier, accompanied him for moral support, and then nicked his kind of idea and his improvised lines, and basically landed the part with a big director at that time, played by touchingly here by Jim Broadbent, and that's what basically launched his career. But later, when that same director came to him for help to lend his name, Kelly was too narcissistic to do that. So again, he let down someone else. We next see Jay Kelly with his daughters. He tries to reconnect with them. One of his daughters is on a kind of Euro trip to France. But basically, it turns out that Jay Kelly wasn't there for all those important milestones. He was too wrapped up in his career. Realistically, there was no alternative to that kind of ruthless ambition, but he always thought it would be kind of temporary. but in fact, it consumed his entire kind of youth and middle age. And that is, the simple truth about great artists. They have to be extraordinarily selfish. Think of, Will Shakespeare, Karl Marx, to take two examples of writers, artists, philosophers, thinkers. Shakespeare, died at what we would consider to be kind of middle age now, 52, but he'd written a folio of epic works, immortal plays. Um, and so that the casualties of this necessary selfishness are the loved ones, or perhaps not so loved ones. Shakespeare infamously bequeathed his wife his second best bed in his will, whilst the beneficiaries are all of us, readers and audiences who get to enjoy the fruits of labor, of their labor down the generations. And the movie actually keeps repeating this motif or leitmotif that Kelly's the kind of star who makes strangers happy. People keep telling him, his daughter, his agent. The problem is he forgot to make those close to him happy, and he's now very much stranded, lonely and and alone. And it just kind of comes back to what do the movies, what does Hollywood represent? It sells itself as the dream factory. It's really, of course, as Mel Gibson has been reminding us in light of the Epstein files, a much darker place. But we invest ourselves in the movies we grew up with as kids, children's movies, animated movies, teenage franchises. As we get older, date night movies, those that transport us to other eras. The movies that made us, in one sense. We obviously all increasingly inhabit this kind of virtual reality of screens rather than the real world out there. And movies tap into this sad fact that we all have dreams. But as with Kelly's acting buddy, played by Billy Crudup, most of us don't get to live them out. Only a handful of J. Kellys get to realize them. And what is that price of fame or success? I started to think again, interestingly, of DiCaprio. He seems to kind of carry this pensive sadness around in his interviews, or is it just what the French call ennui, boredom, existential kind of exhaustion? As Nikki Glazer roasted him at this year's Golden Globes after a cheap gag about his young girlfriends, Nikki Glazer said, "We don't know anything else about you, man." So superstardom, that kind of level of A-list hyper celebrity that Jay Kelly represents here, is ultimately, it's very corrosive. It's a poison chalice. It's a whirlwind. It wreaks destruction in its wake, self-destruction. It leaves behind a litany of damaged souls and corpses, either the stars themselves or certainly their entourage and those around them. I think one actor we don't have to worry about labeling as a movie star is Adam Sandler. It'll always remain a mystery to this critic as to how he's built an A-list career of trashy movies, but perhaps that's the premise for the sequel to Jay Kelly. Jay Kelly's basically a bittersweet meditation by Noah Baumbach. Remember his earlier work, of course. My favorite, The Squid and the Whale. After that, he did While We Were Young. Those are two great films, very much raw indie kind of art house movies. I think late Baumbach has become a much more high production, kind of polished affair. I very much prefer his early movies. But Jay Kelly's a bittersweet meditation on fame, celebrity. But the problem is we don't see enough of Jay Kelly's kind of movies and his life. And the trick that the movie is relying on is that George Clooney and Jay Kelly are meant to be, of course, interchangeable. In other words, the audience is so invested in Clooney's career that will do the heavy lifting, emotionally speaking. But alas, this doesn't prove to be the case. It's worth remembering harking back to the 90s when George Clooney was not a movie star, when he was struggling to cross over from TV, from ER into movies, and he was kind of having one underwhelming flop after another. I remember watching The Perfect Storm in 2000, and that, boy, did that feel like the last chance saloon for him. But he did obviously cross over in the meantime, passe Tarantino. So is he a movie star? Is Clooney a movie star, as Tarantino asks? Or did the pictures simply become small, as Gloria Swanson puts it at the end of Sunset Boulevard? Is that the reason that he kind of became big? And this has never been truer than at this current moment, post pandemic, in the age of streaming. You know, cinema may never recover. Tom Cruise has clearly got a lot of angst about it. Movies continue to be oven baked for a home audience. So there we are. I mean, it seems at the end of the day, all of the stuff we've covered today and the themes of this movie do seem a bit obviously self indulgent at this time to be making a movie about a star who's got buyer's remorse at a time when the world is burning. But hey, perhaps we need the escapism of movies more than ever in the face of the apocalypse. At the tribute at the end of Jay Kelly, Sandler's agent tries to cheer Jay Kelly up. He points to a giant projection of him and he says, "You're the last of the real movie stars." And of course, Clooney has that smooth, charming, suave, debonair, thing going on. But let's face it, he's no Douglas Fairbanks, Rudolph Valentino, let alone a Cary Grant, Clark Gable, or Rock Hudson. The great stars of the golden age of the studio system expired a long time ago. Clooney at the end of the day was or is the face of Nespresso. And there's something perhaps slightly one dimensional and plastic about our current crop of 21st century movie stars. Maybe every age gets the stars that it deserves.